Нарешті ця подія, Торонто, є традиційною територією багатьох націй, включаючи Місисаги з Кредиту, Анишенабеги, Чипева, Hodonoushoni та народи Вендат, і тепер є домом багатьох різноманітних корінних народів. Ми також визнаємо, що Торонто підпадає під дію договору 13 з Місисагами з Кредиту. Заохочуємо вас дізнати більше про землю, на якій ви знаходитеся. Welcome everyone, вітаю вас. My name is Anastasia Paczynski, and it is an honor to welcome you to St. Vladimir Institute's panel to honor International Women's Day, Dynamic Women, a Spotlight on Ukrainian Canadian Visual Artists. Indigenous peoples always acknowledge the land at the start of their gatherings, ceremonies, and events. It is important for us to start this event with a land acknowledgement because it gives us time for reflection and demonstrates respect for Indigenous treaties, lands, and people. We're all accountable for honoring and respecting the history of this land. We are also grateful for the friendship and support that the Ukrainian Canadian settlers received from the Indigenous people when they first arrived. They continue to help Ukrainians today by contributing financially to help Ukraine in its current battle against invaders, and also by raising awareness about the importance of respecting a shared past, specifically by wearing the kokum scarves, a symbol of humanity and resilience. We are dedicating this evening to our Ukrainian heroes, including brave artists who have dropped their art to pick up arms to protect their homes. May they soar above the horrors of destruction and continue to create beauty. Слава Україні! Цей вечір буде проводитися переважно англійською мовою. There are a few technical items to bring to your attention before we get started. Please keep your audio muted. You are welcome to keep your video on if you like. However, muting your microphones will allow us to better focus on our panelists and their comments. There will be an opportunity to engage with the panelists via chat. The chat feature is at the bottom of your screen. If you hover your mouse along the bottom of the screen, you should see the chat icon appear. It is a second from the left. Please type your questions here in either English or Ukrainian. The chat box will be monitored and we will be trying to incorporate as many questions as possible. Please include your name and to whom your question is addressed. For example, hello, my name is Anastasia and my question is to Marta. Please be aware that this presentation is being recorded. Allow me to introduce more about St. Vladimir Institute, or SVI. It's a multifaceted institution in downtown Toronto, Canada, housing 46 rooms for students and providing a home to 13 organizations, including the Ukrainian Museum of Canada, Ontario branch, and the Seuss Foundation of Canada, its founding organization. SVI is also a cultural and educational center with a theater, library, and event space, and is a community hub offering cultural programming, Ukrainian language lessons, and social events. Cultural programming is key to SVI's vision, mission, history, and legacy. It's key to strengthening the identity and community of individuals of Ukrainian descent while making an important contribution to the national culture of Canada. And this is why St. Vladimir's Institute is excited to be presenting this panel discussion in collaboration with the Ukrainian Canadian Art Foundation, more commonly known by its Ukrainian acronym, Kumf. Kumf has been the cornerstone of Toronto's and Ontario's vibrant Ukrainian Canadian visual arts community for more than 45 years. It is dedicated to serving the Ukrainian Canadian community, as well as the community at large, by exhibiting and fostering an understanding of art and preserving and collecting quality artworks. Kumf seeks to highlight shared experiences, bridge cultures, and enhance our understanding of the world through art. Now I'd like to turn the discussion over to our moderator, Roxolana Janischewsky, who is Vice President, Governance and Strategic Planning of the Ukrainian Canadian Art Foundation and its Kumf Gallery. As an avid art collector, Roxolana has studied art history with a focus on European and Ukrainian art and has traveled the world visiting great museums and architectural treasures. Welcome, Roxolana.
Thank you, Anastasia. Good evening and welcome, dear guests, to St. Vladimir Institute's panel honoring International Women's Day, Dynamic Women, a Spotlight on Ukrainian Canadian Visual Arts. The Ukrainian Canadian Art Foundation is very grateful to have been invited by St. Vladimir Institute to partake in and co-sponsor this event. Many thanks. I am honored to be this evening's moderator and to have the opportunity for discussion with our inspiring panel, Anna Bucciarelli, Marta Iwanek, Olenka Kleban, and Larisa Sembaliuk Cheladyn. Добрий вечір. Вітаємо всіх шановних гостей до Інституту Святого Володимира на панель в честь Міжнародного дня жінки. Динамічні жінки у центрі уваги українські канадські художники. Я називаюся Roxolana Janischewska Martin і я є віце-президентом Канадсько-Української мистецької фундації. Kumf є дуже вдячний Інститутові Святого Володимира за запрошення взяти участь у сьогоднішньому панелі як співспонсором. Спасибі. Я маю честь бути модератором сьогоднішнього вечора і мати нагоду вести дискусію з нашими видатними панелістами Анною Шинловою Bucciarelli, Мартою Iwanek, Оленкою Kleban і Ларисою Sembaliuk Cheladyn. We have their detailed biographies and some of their work posted on the SVI website. Please have a look when you have a moment. And now let's hear more about their personal journeys. I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce each of our inspiring and dynamic panelists. Anna Shinlova Bucciarelli is a professional illustrator, primarily known for her designs of Canada's most stunning collectible coins, treasured for their rarity and craftsmanship. Anna's unique style is influenced by her training as a child in KU in classic Ukrainian folk art called Petrikivka. Focusing on intricate floral and plant motifs, she brings together various forms of traditional media and introduces digital elements that bring delicate, exquisite detail to her designs. Anna incorporates elements of Petrikivka painting in commercial illustrations for internationally known brands, as well as public artwork. In addition to Canadian silver and gold coins, dollar coins, her artwork has appeared on Starbucks holiday cups, New York Times best-selling book covers, and colorful murals on the streets of Toronto. Anna has expanded her practice to include social media and virtual art education, with over 100,000 followers on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. She is the 2021 recipient of the Reach Mentorship Residency for the Arts, adapting Petrikivka techniques for the digital era. Her YouTube channel offers lessons in Petrikivka techniques, thus ensuring that this painting style lives on in the digital age. Marta Iwanek is a Ukrainian Canadian documentary filmmaker and photographer. She is a graduate of the journalism program at X University and the photojournalism program at Loyalist College. Her work examines community and family through the lens of identity and memory, what we gain from them, and what happens when that connection is lost. Marta is a three-time Canadian National Magazine Award winner, and her work has also been recognized by Hot Docs Canadian International Documentary Festival, the Canadian Journalism Foundation, the Magenta Foundation, AIAP, News Photographers Association of Canada, the National Press Photographers Association, and she was a participant in the Eddie Adams workshop in Jeffersonville, New York. Her work has been published in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CBC, NBC Left Field, the Globe and Mail, Maclean's, the Canadian Press, the Toronto Star, CTV, and Maisonneuve. Olenka Kleban is a mold maker, sculptor, pisankar, and community singer of Narodny Holos. Her philosophy toward art is rooted in the idea that labor draws people together, creating circumstances of shared identity and acceptance. Olenka has maintained her Ukrainian Canadian upbringing by working with grassroots arts organization Kosa Kolektiv. Her decade of work with Kosa focused on sustaining awareness of her ancestors' lives, the circumstances they lived through, and supporting other people's humanity in the same way. Ukrainian folk song, craft, dance, and feasting have become the foundation for all of Olenka's work as an artist. She regards the responsibility to make Ukrainian craft equally with the duty to teach it to others. Olenka is a tradesperson in the arts, having worked at OCAD University as foundry technician, helping students and faculty produce bronze sculpture, and as a freelance sculptor in Toronto for film sets, museums, and 3D advertisements. She was also lead mold maker at Artworks Foundry, specializing in lost wax bronze production. Today, she works as a visitor experience associate at Mingei International Museum in San Diego, making paisanke. She teaches plant dye methods for pisankarstvo and produces bells in cast bronze and iron. She serves as one of the cultural directors of House of Ukraine San Diego and is a member of Folk Camp Canada. Larisa Sembaliuk Cheladyn views life through the lens of an artist. She completed her BFA in Art and Design from the University of Alberta in 1981 and has enjoyed a successful career as a painter and illustrator for over 40 years. Her work has garnered national and international acclaim. She is best known for her watercolor paintings, digital animations, and children's book illustrations. In 2016, Larisa completed an MA in Ukrainian folklore, focusing on Ukrainian material culture, particularly embroidery. Her thesis was inspired by the pioneer artisans who created Ukrainian Canadian embroidered pillows. Her research culminated in the creation of Embroidered Memories, a touring exhibit. Larisa is now working towards a PhD in Media and Cultural Studies at the University of Alberta. Her research focus is on how ethnic identity was visualized in Ukrainian Canadian comics. She is illustrating her dissertation, which will be presented as a digital graphic biography of the Winnipeg-based artist-illustrator Jacob Majdanek. Larisa is also currently collaborating with artist Theo Harasimiu to create a legacy mosaic from the 6,000 printing blocks salvaged when the Winnipeg-based Ukrainian language publisher, Trident Press, closed its doors in 2018. A big welcome to each of you. Now that we all know a little bit more about you, let's hear more about your personal journeys. You're all women, you're all visual artists, but your styles and media are very different. Among others, notably Anna's adaptations of Petrikilka, Marta's documentary work in film, Olenka's sculptures, molds, and folk arts, and Larisa's watercolors, digital animations, and children's books illustrations. All, how did your Ukrainian heritage shape you as an artist? Let's start with Anna.
Anna, we can't hear you. Maybe if we go to Marta first, so we can get Anna more hooked up on audio. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sure. All right. So, hi everyone. I think I was trying to think about this question, and it's kind of, it feels like it's like the water you're swimming in. So having to sort of describe how it's affected you is actually difficult because it's always been a part of who you are. But I think, you know, being Ukrainian, being first generation, you appreciate all these multi-layered narratives. And I think, you know, Ukrainian history it's never a singular narrative. There's like a polyphony of voices and histories. And I think, you know, that's sort of what's influenced me and what influences my work a lot. Can you hear me? Okay. Could you hear me before? Okay, good. So, you know, a lot of the work I do is kind of this attempt to bring all these sort of scattered narratives together. You know, I work a lot on memory and how the past affects the present day. there's still so many conversations that as a community we need to have about our past. So, you know, through the work, I'm trying to kind of also deal with that through that intergenerational trauma that a lot of us have. And I'm looking at sort of the effects of the past, especially like on family units, because I think every single Ukrainian family is like a history book, right? Like there's just so much history within each family that you can just focus on one family and you can get all these multiple narratives. So, you know, my family are Ukrainians who are also from Poland. I think it's kind of not a very known history, especially in Ukraine, that so many Ukrainians ended up in Poland after World War II. And then, you know, all my grandparents were deported under Operation Vistula by the Polish military at the time. And then my parents immigrated to Canada in the late 80s. So this sort of multi-layered displacement is a part of, you know, my history and many Ukrainians' histories. And I think the work has also evolved as well, because, you know, you can get really stuck in this sort of difficult narratives and pain. So also those depths do provide a lot of great joy. And so I want that to also be present in my work. And I think also, like, I've been processing a lot, you know, especially with the recent events. And I always also saw my work a bit as like a warning and a bit as like, you know, working through all this and what happens when communities are torn apart. And so, you know, part of you is kind of feeling this emotion of, you know, why weren't people listening? But yeah, so just watching it with like a deep sadness that this new trauma is happening to a new generation. So, and the work that we're going to have to do to work through that. So, yeah, thank you. And I think Olenka was next, or
yeah, I think we have Anna back.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me now? Okay, great. Sorry, I apologize for technical difficulties. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here and to be included in this amazing group of talented women. To answer your question, Roxolana, I was born and raised in Kiev, and I spent half of my life in Ukraine, and sort of the formative years for me as an artist were spent being surrounded by that Ukrainian art, specifically folk art. And so that entire aesthetic and the visual language, I've carried that through all the way to the work that I'm doing right now. And so for me, that's more on a kind of macro level, and more specifically, Petrikivka as a style appears in my work, whether it's digital or watercolor, constantly. And I sort of, I credit my training in Petrikivka to allowing me to develop a unique visual style that kind of helped me create my brand and distinguish myself as an artist and as an illustrator.
Thank you. Let's go to Olenka.
Hi. I really resonated with what Marta said about, you know, I can't rephrase what she said about, you know, swimming in, or being aware of the water that you're swimming in. But yeah, similarly, I feel like it's very hard to know how my Ukrainian heritage has shaped me as an artist or as a person in general. It's almost asking me to know what it's like to not be myself, or know what it's like to not have lived my life or lived the experience that I've lived, or come out of the experiences of my parents and their parents. So I'll never know what it's like to separate any of that. At the same time, I'm aware that having grown up in Canada, in Ontario, there is a certain degree, I would say, especially being a white person in a majority white country, there is always the option to assimilate to, pop culture, the broader pop culture. But at the same time, I was raised in a tight-knit Ukrainian community, and so everything I do is a reflection of being raised in that community. And so everything I do as an artist or as a person in general, I would say is a reflection of, what is it to be, I guess, a Ukrainian whose family left Ukraine generations ago. What is it like to be someone who, Russification, it has been effective to a certain degree. Like, I wouldn't say I'm Russified, but the Russification of Ukraine, or attempts of Russification of Ukraine, have resulted in, my grandparents and great-grandparents having left Ukraine in order to live. And as a result, say, I speak English. My strongest language is not Ukrainian. So even just that as a person and as an artist is something that speaks to, how, my life has been as a Ukrainian, or as a reflection of someone in a lineage that has fled Ukraine. I don't know what it's like not to be Ukrainian, or how I can't really trace exactly how my heritage has shaped my art. But I do know that the themes come out because there's no other way to be.
Thank you, Olenka. And Larisa?
Dobry večer. It's good to be here today. And this evening for you, a late afternoon for me here in Victoria. Those who don't know me, I'm third generation Ukrainian Canadian, and I have had a chance to think back of how that has affected me. I grew up during a time, and like my formative years as an artist was in Canada, when multiculturalism became a thing, and most of my friends had heritage from someplace else. And we were growing up during a time where we were encouraged to be proud of where we came from, to look for our roots and our personal background, but also to appreciate the cultures of everyone else around us. So it was a good time when it came to looking at ethnic background. I like to say that as an artist, for me, that kind of a background, I tell people my first canvas was actually an egg. It was a pesanka. My baba was very proud of all the crafts, the folk art that came from her background, that she learned from her mother and grandmother. And she also taught me how to weave and how to embroider and to do rospes. I also had a grounding through the community, because those of us from that era attended Saturday schools. We were usually involved in some kind of youth organization, plus SUM, or I belonged to SUMK, where you got another support of an encouragement to embrace your heritage. I also was lucky in that I have a father who was he was an artist as well. And through his appreciation of the arts, I had a balance between the folk art and the fine art, a lot of exposure to masters like Miron Levitsky, Jacques Gnizdowski, Leo Moll, that had moved to Canada. And also in 1975, Tato took us to Ukraine, and we had a chance to visit museums and churches in Lviv and Kiev. And it reinforced the foundational base of good composition, use of light. So it was a balance that's inside me as an artist. Also during that time, my Tato, 1975, they unveiled the Vegreville Pesanka that he designed. So that had an impact on me, and notably, I know my culture from that. So I like to tell people that I was introduced to my culture through osmosis. It was around me. I'm in my mom's house right now. You can see the paintings behind me. That has always been part of my life. And out of all of that, when I reflected on this, and we knew we were going to be asked this question, and I reflected on, okay, how has it affected me? And I guess very specifically, the strong tie to the environment that our culture has had. We have flowers on our vyshyatya and our weaving, petrakiuka. It ties us to the environment. And some of my first shows were about makia, poppies I was painting. And I had exhibits of endangered species. I had the Flowers of the Bible exhibit. And so I have that connection that goes deep past Christianity into our pagan roots as I connect with the artwork from the past. And so, asking how has our heritage affected us? It's in my roots. My Baba used to say it's in the blue jeans. It's part of my dusha, and I can't separate it. So that kind of wraps up how I would answer that.
Thank you. Anna, when or how did you know that you were going to pursue a career in art? And what were the factors that influenced your decision to choose this path?
Well, it's not a straightforward story, and I always knew I was an artist. I didn't think I was going to pursue art as a career until I would say my late 30s, and it's been quite a journey that I think many of us in the immigrant community can probably identify with. I came to Canada with my parents and my sister in my late teens. And so even though I've been painting and doing arts and creating things in one way or the other since I was a kid, my priorities at the time were really about sort of, escaping the kind of the financial insecurity of the 90s and, trying to make a better life, and with an understanding that career as an artist is it's a privilege, and it's quite an unpredictable way to make a living. So I've put my aspirations aside in terms of art and actually pursued a career in the corporate world. I went to business school. I never thought that my painting would generate any sort of interest, beyond just sort of a hobby. And for a long time, for over a decade, I did sort of enjoy a rather mediocre, if I may say so, career in the corporate world, in the world of marketing. But I always painted sort of on the side, and I think it was a constellation of factors that brought me to the place where I'm at right now. One of them being the rise of social media and sort of being quote unquote discovered. And it's not one particular event that kind of elevated me to the level that I'm at right now in terms of the types of projects that I'm working on, but more of a series of events. But it probably started with the Starbucks cup, where my Petrikivka infused doodles were picked up by Starbucks just from posting it on Instagram. Similarly, Royal Canadian Mint was their managers were sort of just browsing and looking for a very specific type of illustration, and noticed my Petrikivka on social media and reached out to me. So everything sort of culminated. It was probably a span of maybe 12 months or 14 months where suddenly my art was noticed. So it was a bit of an accident, and for a long time, and I don't know, I'm curious to hear from other panelists whether this sort of resonates. But for the longest time, I had to sort of balance my day job with my artistic pursuits, and I was actually quite happy because not having to pick up every project out there, but really being selective and working on the coins, or like working with big brands only because I didn't have the financial pressure. So allowed me to sort of craft my portfolio in the way that I wanted to. And as I mentioned, Roxolana, in when I was answering your initial question, I do credit Petrikivka as sort of the main driver of my success, because I've always, every time a creative director reaches out to me out of the blue on social media, I always ask, like, why me, why my style? And they always say that it's nothing like they've ever seen, and they can't quite recognize where the style is from, the particular strokes, the color schemes. I've had people speculate that, it looks like something that we've seen in Indian art. And I always make a point in saying, to say that it's a particular type of folk art, wherever I can, because it shows me that there's tremendous wealth of tremendous value in Ukrainian folk art specifically, that is being appreciated even when people don't quite know the name of the style. And there's so much opportunity to promote it and to sort of introduce the world to the wealth of creativity that we have. And I feel blessed that I can be a part of that process. So to sort of finish answering your question in terms of when did I know, I think officially I've transitioned to being a full-time artist at the age of 38. So not quite as a beginner artist. It simply sort of happened organically as a series of events, and it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for that unique visual language and that particular aesthetic that I was able to absorb as a child back home.
Oh, thank you. Marta, your acclaimed documentary, Vika, is about two Ukrainian sisters separated by adoption. What was the driving creative force behind this work?
So I think I'll kind of take you on the journey of how I came to that film to begin with. I've spent a lot of my career working for newspapers, for wires. And so after I graduated photojournalism school, I really wanted to go back to Ukraine to just, reconnect with this place that I'd grown up hearing about, learning about, and just wanted to just spend time there and had opportunity and time to do that. So I was actually working on assisting on a film, and then all of a sudden, Euromaidan was happening, and I was in Kyiv at that time. And so I decided to stay for a week, and then, everything just ballooned, and it became Maidan, and it became the Revolution of Dignity. And so I ended up staying for 3 months and reporting. And so, I learned a lot covering Maidan. In terms of my practice, I learned that I'm not a conflict photographer. I'm not a war photographer. That, what struck me the most on Maidan was the sort of community organizing moments that were happening, and not the sort of, dramatic images that were being circulated across the globe. And so, I think seeing those dramatic images also made me kind of question why are people doing this, right? Like, what leads to this? And I don't think that narrative was really getting across. So I think, after that, I sort of shifted my practice to really just focus on individual narratives, highlight stories of people in Ukraine, and, create this more nuanced view of the country and hopes and dreams of people. And so I had known Vika for quite a while. I had met her at Help Us Help the Children camp, which works with kids who are in internats across Ukraine, and it's a Canadian charity that's also partnered with a Ukrainian charity there. And so, you know, there was a talking with Vika. The film came about because she was at a moment in her life where she was leaving her internat. And if people don't know, internats are like your boarding schools, but they're also sort of a state institutional, like a foster care system, right? So there's many different types of internats, and you know, some are sports internats. Like there's varying boarding schools, but you know, Vika's in particular was one for that functioned also as a foster care place. And also, you know, at the same time, Vika had a sister who was adopted, and with that family had moved to Canada. So there was just these parallel stories happening. And so the film became sort of about the bonds that you're able to keep despite distance, but also just how different two people's lives can be coming from the same family. So yeah, and also like any film, you know, is just one little slice of a person's life. Like there's just so much that's changed since. There's so much that, you know, happens before. And I think every story that I do is just a small piece of the puzzle of, you know, telling stories of Ukraine. So, yeah.
Thank you, Marta. Larisa, can you describe one artwork or series of artworks from your oeuvre that you feel was pivotal in your career?
No, in that I've had a long career, 40 years, very fortunate. And every project I've taken on, I have approached it as a learning experience. I've tried something new. So each one has affected me in some way. But there are, I'd like to share 4 briefly with everyone that I would say would be pivotal. And the first would be my first art exhibit. I had already graduated 10 years and I was doing whatever I could to support myself and my family, my husband and I. And 10 years in, after graduating, over Christmas, some wine, my husband and my brother challenged me to my very first art show. I had paintings under the bed that had never been shown. And they said, we'll put a show on for you. And that show, it was a one-day exhibit. There were 250 people that attended. It was called Festival of Poppies. I had 45 paintings of poppies, and they all sold. And it was pivotal in that it was the show that solidified my self-confidence as being an artist. It confirmed that my choice was a good one. And then a few years later, I created a collection called Flowers of the Americas. My passion for endangered species and the environment came out, and I created a collection that traveled North, Central, and South. Well, it was flowers of North, Central, and South America that were endangered, and it traveled for 6 months through South America. And it was a fundraiser for the World Wildlife Fund. And I remember Prince Philip, His Royal Highness, was patron of the World Wildlife Fund, and I thought it would kind of be nice to have some words from him in the introduction to my catalog, and debating if I should ask or not. And I thought, what's the worst thing that could happen? And it would be that his secretary would throw my letter in the garbage. So I sent off a letter and didn't hear it back from him until the final show in Buenos Aires. The attaché at the embassy came running across the field, Larisa, we have this telex. That was in 96. There was no emails yet. And His Royal Highness, if you come to Geneva, he'll open a show for you. So I didn't hesitate, and we got funding to move the show to Geneva. And so that was pivotal in that it gave me the exposure and the confidence in a broader environment of art. And then I had an opportunity to illustrate the children's books, Kazka Productions, in the 1980s. That was sort of an aside thing that I really enjoyed doing. But it wasn't until then, at 2008, I was invited to be the feature artist for the International Leonard Cohen Festival that was being hosted in Edmonton. And through that, I got to experiment with animation. I went beyond, well, it was still watercolor, but it was watercolor that was animated, and I worked with it collaboratively. I got to interact with Leonard Cohen, and that, again, was a growth period for me beyond two-dimensional paper. I went into the digital. And finally, I'm into a new journey now to share with everyone. It's an academic journey. And I am testing the boundaries of academia. I have permission to do my dissertation as a graphic novel, a digital graphic novel. So I am illustrating the biography of the artist Jacob Majdanek. And people are questioning me, why are you doing that? And I'm saying, well, picture is worth 1,000 words, and I'm much better at drawing pictures than I am at writing. So many pivotal points, and I am sure there will be more. I think everyone can relate to some of the moments that have changed them. But that, is kind of where my growth has been and in the turns I've taken in my life.
Thank you. Olenka, you've been very active in Kosa Kolektiv and revitalizing Ukrainian folk traditions and rituals in Canada. How do these influence the work that you create?
So Kosa Collective has been amazing for validating my want to make folk art. I would say, if we're to break up my my life as a person who makes Ukrainian art or art at all, I grew up in the Ukrainian community, so I made a lot of folk art. Then I went to an arts university, OCAD University, where I focused more on creating original sculptures and learned a bit about, I guess, the art world and the concept of fine art. And then after I graduated, Kosa was kind of there as a community that brought me back into making folk art and participating in folk art. So yeah, I feel like folk art is something that can only live if there are numbers of people doing it together. It doesn't live on its own, unlike fine art. An artist can create a single work and it can stand on its own if you consider it fine art, or at least in my definition of fine art. Whereas folk art is like a baby, and it needs a community, a village around it in order to thrive. So I really enjoy being in that mix of just knowing that you're in a community of people who are making art together and living together. So yeah, Kosa has helped me just to really, at this point, blur the lines of folk art and fine art for me to the point where I don't really worry about whether I'm making one or the other, which I used to coming out of art school. Even from my professors, some professors I got pretty pointed words about not making folk art. And that made me think of myself as a failed folk artist, which I like viewing myself that way, because it almost
Cam guest, the courtyard is open and available for you.
Sorry, I'm at work right now. Yeah, so Kosa just blurred the lines for me between folk art and fine art, and now I feel like I can practice either form, either discipline, with an equal sense of dignity and duty. I want to talk about one example where I guess an experience of working with Kosa kind of shed a good light on how I'd like to work, and when am I producing work that I feel is meaningful. So with Casa, we went out to our friend Yulia and Theodor's farm just outside of Toronto. We met with our Belarusian friends to do Hukanie Vesne. And so we sang various Vesnyanki, both in Ukrainian and Belarusian. Us Ukrainians, we would join the Belarusians whenever there was a repeating refrain that we could catch on to, and vice versa. We did chorovody, so walking dances while singing. We sowed grain. And then there was this swing that we got to at the edge of the field right before the property turned into forest. The swing, it was hung from about 30 feet up, and the women took turns swinging on the swing. So we each sat on the swing. When I was on it, I thought I was going to die, but I was also elated. It was so exhilarating. And as each woman took her turn on the swing, the rest of the group sang a Vesnyanka. So you swing, you were on the swing for the duration of a song. And the children that were with us came up and asked for their turn on the swing, and they were turned away. And they were told, hey, go play in the forest. And which I'm not used to within, I guess, the way I was raised in our Ukrainian community in Canada. Usually we have the kids perform the folk art, and it's not something for the adults to do. We put it all, towards the kids or for the teachers to teach. And then we stopped doing that as adults. So yeah, being involved with Casa Collective, an urban folk art group, kind of helped me to shed the barriers or the boxes that I thought there were between being able to perform folk art or do folk art and not.
Thank you, Olenka. Anna, you mentioned how Petrikiuka has been a major influence on your work. Can you tell us about your experience learning Petrikiuka in Ukraine and how it evolved into the work you create today?
Absolutely. Before I do, though, I just wanted to say I was incredibly moved by Olenka's description of folk art as a baby that sort of has to be nurtured. And I have to admit, I'm a bit of a loner and an introvert, and I work by myself. But for the most part, it got me thinking, why is that anytime I paint something, I do, particularly Petrikivka, I'm so excited to share that feeling. It's just such a joyful thing. So anyway, thank you for that metaphor. It was beautiful. And to answer your question, so in terms of Petrikivka as a sort of style, as a craft, I believe I was 10 or 11 when a teacher showed up in my school, and it was sort of an extracurricular activity that they were offering for free in my school. And I regret to say that I don't remember the name of the teacher because it was 30 years ago, but she offered these lessons after hours, and something about, because I've tried everything at that point. I've tried traditional watercolor, gouache, all sorts of different things. Something about the way she kind of presented the learning process itself, I was drawn to, and I think it has to do with maybe sort of the systematic way you can kind of outline the entire logic of Petrikivka, from particular strokes to the way you can take one drop shape stroke and combine it into an infinite variety of different flowers and organic motifs. I found it absolutely fascinating, similar to math always was of interest to me, and just playing with numbers. And it had that particular kind of logic versus traditional watercolor, which to me at that time was a bit chaotic, and I didn't understand how to make sense of it. It had a certain, and only years and years later, when I had time to sort of contemplate and try to understand why it was so appealing to me, I realized that because of the certain order and logic in that art, it's very harmonious. It's very, in a way, predictable, even though every composition you come up with is different, but it has a certain sense of harmony and logic. And I think, I may be completely off here, but I think it really reflects the broader worldview of Ukrainian culture. Just like any folk art, it's a reflection of a soul. There are no right and wrong. Like, you can't create a bad folk art painting. You can create a bad piece of fine art, and I do sort of both. And feel free to disagree with me, but that's just sort of me hypothesizing about it. But I think that it's a reflection of a particular worldview of a particular culture, of our culture. And there's no wrong way of viewing the world, but I think that aesthetic and the way, you can organize your strokes in any shape, in any form, which is, by the way, what allows me to create designs within coins, because I'm always sort of bound to that circular shape when I'm designing modern coins. I think that it just really resonated with me when I was a child. And as someone who, as I mentioned, I'm a bit of an introvert, and I have a hard time sometimes expressing myself with words. For me, it offered a way to express a feeling or particular point of view or a state of mind through color and through strokes. So that's sort of a long-winded way of saying I've picked it up as a child. I've enjoyed learning it process itself tremendously, because all we did was many hours of repeating different strokes, pointed in one direction, then pointed in another direction. And then the feeling, the anticipation of being able to combine these strokes into something bigger and more beautiful was just, I can't quite come up with a parallel or something similar in terms of the feeling that I had. And so it stayed with me, and I've practiced Petrikivka on and off for years after, until, as I mentioned before, later in my 30s, it became part of my visual language. And now more consciously, I'm incorporating those specific strokes, the specific logic of organizing your composition into everything I do. So even though it may not always be immediately obvious, because I'm reinterpreting sort of layers upon layers of knowledge that is not mine. It's sort of, it goes back centuries. It's there. And I do believe that I'm just tapping into something that's been perfected and developed over time. Hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Marta, you've been working in your field for a number of years. What advice would you give to emerging women artists entering the art world?
Yeah, I think for anyone entering, I think, asking yourself very simple questions. What do you want to say with your work and what's important to you? I think as long as you have those questions guiding you, I think that'll bring like a depth to your work and a purpose to your work, right? I think, working in a field where you are part of an underrepresented group, it will be harder. You will be underestimated. And I think finding community is really the key to sort of, working your way in the industry that is like that, right? So, the industry is still heavily white, heavily male, like 80% in terms of like world contest entries, right? So I think finding those groups where, you know, you amplify each other's voices and you build community and you sort of build together rather than competing against each other, because I think also photojournalism especially can be very like lone wolf. So you want to interrupt that and build community. And filmmaking itself is more collaborative. So that's what I've really liked about filmmaking. But yeah, amplify each other's voices. I think also, you know, we talk a lot about our work and what drives it, but I think just in a very practical way, like, you know, you have to be business oriented because this is sort of the logic as artists that we exist in, right? So you have to like, don't be afraid to ask those business questions. How much, you know, did someone charge for this, or how much is this rate? Because you know, you need to pay the rent if you don't come from a wealthy background. But I also think that you could also not monetize your work too, and that's okay too. You could get another job and then work just to make your art and not have to make it into a commodity and something, a product that you have to sell. And I think, you know, both ways of being are great. And it's just figuring out what's best for you. Yeah.
Thank you. Larisa, over your 40-plus year career as an artist, you've likely seen many changes. How has the art world's relationship to women artists changed since you began your career, and how can it still improve?
When I think back over time, personally, within my family, within my Ukrainian community, I would have to say I've seen very little change, in that I come from an environment that the arts was always supported, and there was an equality between the females and the males. My Baba and Guido worked together to create Pesenke and to weave, and it was respected by men and women in the community, what my Baba did. I've been thinking back about, she sent both her son and her daughter to art school in Calgary. Like, my dad and my aunt both went to art school here in Canada, which was like in the, I'm trying to think when that would have been, 30s, 40s, somewhere in there, which is really unusual. And both studied art, both became artists. And then in my own family, I was encouraged to go on and study art. My mom and dad totally supported me. And then also I had great support from the Ukrainian Women's Association of Canada, women in the Ukrainian community, such as Sofia Skrepnik in Edmonton, or Audrey Uzwish, and that it wasn't, being a woman didn't matter. But when I went to Ukraine, I was 16, and it became really obvious that there's a difference in how women artists were treated around the world. And the same when I went to South America with my art. And the big difference I found between being a woman in Canada and being in Ukraine, I came home with books, Petrikyuka, a book, a couple of them about, and it was a specific artist was being honored with her own book. And she was being honored for her ingenuity in the arts and for her technique, and as well as other fine artists who were painting. They were being respected as artists, as opposed to the women in Canada were being respected for preserving art forms, not so much for creating their own expression. And same thing in South America. A lot of the female artists I met were being recognized for their inspirations, for the uniqueness of their work, and they had books created and catalogs of their art, which wasn't happening within our community in Edmonton that I grew up in, or with the Ukrainian community across Canada at that time. So I noticed a difference that way, being supported equally in what we did, but being honored in a different way. And then I've also found I worked on an exhibit called Celebrating Women. And I don't know if Tamara has the slide for that. I was asked to create a collection of paintings honoring Canadian women. And it was unveiled on International Women's Day, March 8th in 2004. And initially, it was a very narrow focus of, I was to paint a painting for the first female judge, the first female doctor in Canada, the first female aeronautical engineer. And I realized that all those women came from Ontario. They were all of us born within a range of about 8 years. And I realized that was the same range that my Baba was born in. And they were all white Anglo-Saxon women. And I approached the group and I said, Canadian women this doesn't fit the Canadian demographic at all. We have women in Northern Canada, Southern Canada, East, West. We have a range of generation of women. We have from different ethnic backgrounds. And rather than following the list that they gave me, I chose, this was the first painting I proposed, which was called Fabric of a Nation, taking inspiration from the fabric of different cultures. And that was another eye-opener for me of how women are treated differently within different cultures, or the focus, it could be different depending on where you are, who you're interacting with. And so I hoped with this exhibit, I created 25 paintings that I would be able to connect people to the art, but also to different aspects of being a woman in Canada. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but there is a connection. How it could be better, better obviously depends on where you're coming from. And I think just support. As a mature artist, I like to support emerging artists. And I think we all, from what I've heard, like to support youth coming up, children coming up, exposing them to art. And that kind of appreciation just ends up supporting, whether you're female or male, and giving you an opportunity to create when you feel inspired. And,
Thank you. Yeah. Olenka, if you think back to the old masters, we saw women portrayed as mothers or nudes or Madonnas. In what ways has art had an influence on gender roles in society and your art?
This one's tough for me to answer because I feel like I've never had a focus with my art to affect or influence gender roles. And yeah, I'm not an anthropologist or sociologist, so to speak more broadly about art's influence on gender roles is difficult. So I'll speak from my own perspective. I'd say that I actually hope that my art has no influence on gender roles in society, just because I'm not looking to do that with my work, and I respect that others do strive to influence gender roles, but the work I make doesn't come from that ethos. But I'm also aware that I have so many gender biases within me, and I have to do the work to recognize those biases so that I'm not assuming those biases onto other people and affecting or cornering people into, thinking that they should be a certain way based on their gender. And yeah, if anyone has been affected by my work to feel like they are or they should be, something based on their gender, I would be interested to hear from you. In my attempt to, figure out what my gender biases are, and just be fair to everyone when I make work and when I put work out there. But yeah, generally working in a bronze casting foundry, I have produced a lot for other artists, a lot of work that is based on the female figure. And not only based on the female figure, but very specific types of female figures. Actually, at one foundry, the salesperson, he said, oh, the works that sell the most are female figure, no nipples, hairless, and winged. And yeah, so to produce that work, you know, as a tradesperson, in a way, I mean, it doesn't feel great, but at the same time, knowing that this exists in society and it sells really well in Vegas, in a way, it feels like, well, as a woman working in a foundry, I'm almost robbing a man of the opportunity to make this work. So there's a bit of a feeling of like taking back, you know, some of the oppression in that. And at the same time, yeah, those sculptures do deep down affect me because they do make me feel like I should be hairless and, you know, without nipples and have wings if I want to be valued. So instead of making work like that, you know, I make pisanke, I sing songs with others, I make bells, and those are things that I hope don't corner anyone into thinking something particular about their gender, including myself. Yeah, but if I do have an ability to make some sort of change, I would think it would be through my actions as a person or the labor that I do. So just being, you know, a woman who works in a foundry, you know, maybe in a workplace that is majority run by men, maybe that has some sort of influence on gender roles in our society. It's hard for me to say, you know, how much of an influence I really have. But I don't know, I did have one particular moment where at one of the foundries I worked at, we did a performance night where we poured bronze after sundown. So we were working only by the light emitted from the molten bronze. And so the crew of 4 of us pouring bronze, we were in our safety gear. So for 1, you couldn't tell our gender. And for 2, we were only really lit minimally. And once we finished doing our pours, we would turn on the lights, and typically we'd take our helmet off and our mask, face shield. And I typically wear a wool hustena, a wool kerchief on my head, similar to the kokum scarf shown at the beginning of the slide, on my head. It's, you know, wool is fantastic for any kind of for fire resistance. So I wear it on my head. It makes perfect sense to me. But when I take my helmet off, I guess it makes me look womanly. So there's a little girl in the crowd whose mother like called me over so I could high five her daughter. I guess she was just excited that I was a woman on set. And, you know, if that one person, you know, seeing me just at work doing my job, changed their idea of who can do what kind of work in society, that, you know, I hope just my labor, just the act of me doing, you know, whatever I'm doing, maybe challenges people's ideas of gender roles. But otherwise, yeah, it's hard for me to track, you know, my influence. And generally, you know, when I make work, I'm not looking to have a message in there about who should be doing what based on their gender.
I guess I was unmuted. Thank you. I wanted to ask all of you a question. What is the social responsibility of visual art and/or the visual artist in a politically turbulent time, like where we find ourselves now? And maybe we can start off with Larisa this time.
I've had some opportunity to think about this recently, and in the past, and we all create art for different reasons at different times. And I think it really depends on your personal philosophy. I had an experience when I was in Geneva. I went to the Basel International Art Expo. Over 400 artists were exhibiting their work. And I remember driving there in the daytime, and about the third booth that I visited, the artwork was very traumatic. It was actually pornographic mutilations where like a breast was cut off and stuff. And then I continued on, and the rest of the artwork, I was there all day. It was very positive, bright. I felt good watching it. But when I was driving back through the Alps at night, only the ugly image of that particular booth kept flashing back at me. And I vowed it's my personal goal to paint or create imagery that is positive. For every negative image, you got to put out at least 7 or 8 or 10 or 20 positive ones in order to counterbalance that. And when I was approached several years ago, when the internment of Ukrainians there was all this funds available, and I was asked to apply to create a collection based on the internment, and I couldn't do it. I could not create imagery about that specific time, and realizing that in me, during times of trauma, I have a personal goal to counterbalance what's happening. There are other artists that are out there documenting what's happening so that it's not forgotten, but that's not me. And so just to go back what I said at the beginning, it's a personal choice what the role should be. And also we wear many hats, and during traumatic times, it may not be the time you're going to be creating. We are mothers, daughters, caregivers, and that is what may come up as our activity at the time. But something does, I think, stir in us afterwards, that you do something in some way. And for me, it's to counterbalance. It's my responsibility I've taken on. I think that's that.
Olenka? Oh, you're not.
There we go. Unmuted. In turbulent times, it's just really important to remember others' humanity and not to condescend anyone, which I think there can be a very slippery slope when tension is high and people really feel that their life is on the line, or the life of their loved ones is on the line. It's very easy to forget about other people or others' humanity. And it's just really important to not condescend anyone. And I think of the internment of Ukrainians and how that was a decision supposedly for the safety of other Canadians. The idea was to keep everyone safe. So let's intern this one entire group of people out of fear. And that was a decision that actually brought about more evil instead of less evil. It was just based on condescension. So, and that came out of tension. And so it's just really important to be aware that, when you're in a turbulent time, if you're trying to work towards protecting one group, that you aren't hurting another group of people or another culture or putting anyone else down.
Thank you. Marta?
Oh yeah, there's so much to say. And I feel like this kind of blends into a few other questions. I think based on like Olenka's point, I think the emotional events, what I've noticed in myself is that it actually has increased my capacity for empathy almost, like, and the want to be even more kind than, you'd usually be. Like, I think like it's almost like your emotional counterbalance to what's happening is you want to be even more, kind and not, and that's sort of, that's important to hold on to not fall into this sort of darkness that's also there. And I think also, to Larissa's point that like we are our practices can be multifaceted. So when I can help or support with picking up the camera, then, finding those moments, but when it's better to put the camera down and, work in other ways, like I've been noticing that, everyone sort of is going to their corner of where their little corner of where they can make a difference and just working in that corner. Right. And, I've noticed that a lot of different women have been doing this sort of weaving work. Like we've been helping people find places to stay, helping support evacuation routes, talking to each other. And so, that's part of my photographic practice and the way I tell stories, but it could also be in just this very practical way as well. And that comes from the way that our community is built, which is very much grassroots and strong civil society, right? But I think also we have a responsibility to promote the voices sort of most affected, like lift up Ukrainian artists in Ukraine, support them, amplify their voices. I think that's super important. And I've also been noticing, just because I work in like, a communication realm in journalism too, this sort of very, very, it has always been a hybrid war. It's always been not just a military war, but it's also been an informational war. And so things can get really polarized really quickly. And we're seeing that a lot, in the last 2 weeks too, how intensely that's happened. And I think, a lot of nuance gets lost. And so just making sure that, we're also keeping an eye out and an openness to nuance. Yeah.
Thank you. Anna?
Difficult question for me to answer. For the past 2 weeks, had real trouble being able to create anything. And I think Larisa alluded to this when she said that we paint for different reasons. And it just so happens that 100% of my work is focused on sort of a particular type of feelings that, that have very little to do with what's going on right now. The colorful, joyful compositions that I typically work on don't seem to have a place right now. And so I'm even having trouble right now coming up with the right words to describe, but I sort of feel like today at this very moment and in the short term, my work doesn't carry as much value. At the same time, it got me thinking about sort of the more long-term goals for myself as an artist with Ukrainian heritage, and really kind of put into focus what I've only, I think, tapped into very little recently in terms of promoting the style and the culture that influenced me as an artist through the platforms that I have. And I'm fortunate to have a fairly broad audience on social media worldwide. And so it is a question that I have to answer for myself, eventually soon. How do I position my work, and how much of how much focus do I put on the specific heritage and some of the aspects of my art. I also teach quite a bit, and so I think it will be. I can't quite give you a well-formulated answer right now because everything is still sort of fresh and ongoing. But I think for me, this means sort of being more mindful about promoting my heritage and helping people understand my culture, and hopefully that will give a little bit more focus to my efforts in the future. But as I said, like it is in this moment right now today, I'm not able to focus on creating anything, unfortunately. I'm quite overwhelmed.
Yeah. Again, a question for all of you. Is there a woman that has influenced you, and in what way? And let's start with Marta for this one.
There's two that I was thinking of. So I think Maria Primachenko probably is like a lot of people. And it was just, when we thought that maybe some of those paintings had been lost, I just saw so many like women posting and like mourning her work. And luckily, I think that a lot were saved. So I think that's good news. But I think that sort of because she used her work as a way to gift things to people, right? Like there was just this ethos to the work that was about, honesty in this very like, like almost like childish way, but in a really in the good sense of that word. And but this sort of want to have the, like I think of like when I hear the word bahatstvo, right? Like it doesn't mean gold, it doesn't mean like expensive things, it means like community, right? Like it means like this folk art, right? Like this is our like bahatstvo, right? And so it was just like how she wanted to just share that with the world. And that emotion really resonates with me. Plus her work is just this like magical realism that's just so beautiful. But it's like her work and then the captions, right? Like the captions, like I wish bread for everyone in the world, like, like these kinds of amazing captions. And also Svetlana Alexievich's work, interviewing many people after the fall of the Soviet Union and weaving individual people's narratives together in this sort of polyphonic narrative, and these sort of circular narratives, I think also is like a huge influence. Yeah.
Larisa?
I've mentioned many of the women who've influenced me, my Baba, my aunt, and then in the community, a lot of women, but I have to actually, when you think down, it's been my mom, who's been supported me in many different ways. I think we all have someone in our life like that, but for me specifically, my mom giving me the courage to choose this as a career. When people said, "Oh, now that you have a BFA, you should become a teacher," and I know that wasn't for me, or giving me the opportunity to create art when I needed a babysitter or needed some cash. She was there for me, but also watching her, she encouraged me, but also some of my close friends to go into their careers, supported them to, you can be a doctor. Yes, you can do whatever, follow your dreams. In particular, watching her support women who wanted to go into the political arena, which is a really scary area to be in then and now, to advocate for other people's rights so yeah, I would say that she's been the biggest influence in my life.
Anna, how about you?
Well, so I have two sort of stories, little vignettes, if you will. One of them was seeing a very large painting by Maria Primachenko in the museum in my 20s. And I literally, I stopped and I stared at it for, I don't know how long, maybe an hour. I was looking at every little detail. And I remember thinking to myself, how can you take a moment, just a few flowers in the field, and make it so captivating that you just want to look at it and you discover more and more color and more emotion and feeling. And I'm not really good at kind of describing my feelings. I could paint you my feelings, but just understand that it was such a it was almost a shock to see, because I've seen that painting before printed, but seeing it live shocked me to my core. And just the ability to take something so seemingly trivial, like a few koloski and a few flowers here and there, and create something that is so magnificent. I remember thinking, I want to be able to do that. And I wasn't at the time, but it just sort of gave me this this drive that I can come back to this day. I have that feeling in me right now as I'm trying to describe it to you. And so that's sort of what I try to evoke every time I sit down to paint something. I want someone to be able to look at a seemingly trivial moment, or as my 7-year-old son says, you know, my mom paints flowers for a living. Well, that can be important because it makes you appreciate the everyday. And I don't want to get too esoterical here, you know, but that's the true source of happiness, not the material things, but being able to appreciate the moment. And that was sort of one of the things that really comes to mind if I think about an answer. And the second one is my mom. She is such a huge inspiration for me, and this goes beyond art. This just in general, seeing how she raised a family, how she moved across the ocean, how she sort of sacrificed everything she had for her children and built a life and stayed optimistic and supported me through everything, whatever it is that I wanted to do. She gave me that sort of safe harbor and confidence to go after what I think is important. And she's sort of like this radar for me, and I can't thank her enough. She's an inspiration for me, and I'm so fortunate to know her, to have her as my mom, to know her as a person. And I'll never get tired of saying this. I love you, Mom. I think you're watching.
Olenka? Oops, you shut it off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, my number one answer was Mama. She's been the most positive influence in my life. She's shown me that life does not stop when circumstances change. And like Anna was saying, you know, we've watched our mothers, move to different places and still make everything work. And you just have to, pivot to meet whatever moment you're in. And so growing up, Mom always made it seem so easy. And she would say like, my mother grew up in New York City. And she said, I went from one Ukrainian ghetto to another Ukrainian ghetto in Hamilton, Ontario. And now that I've moved across the continent, I'm realizing, it's not that easy. And, she raised her children without, her mother being there or her siblings there. And it is hard. And lately, like I have my first pregnancy, and I often feel like I'm hitting a wall. And she'll say, "Oh, be strong like your mama." And so she's acknowledging that, you can only get through this if you're tough as nails. And she always made everything look easy. And now, she's giving me the advice that, no, it's not easy, and you're only going to get through things if you're tough, if you're strong like Mama. So, and then I do want to mention an artist. Not that my mother's not an artist. My mother is an artist, but she won't say that. I want to acknowledge Arkadija Olenska Petreshin as an of late an influential artist to me. So I recently moved to a warm climate in the last 2 years, and I was kind of aware of Arkadia Olenska Patrician before, and now I'm paying attention to her more. I'm realizing like, oh, there's something with this artist that is resonating with me. She was a Ukrainian printmaker, and most of her work, or the work that I know of, features warm weather plants. And to me, that's interesting because she was a Ukrainian artist who was not confined to depicting Ukrainian expectations for art. And yet that didn't make her any less Ukrainian. You know, so she made prints of cacti and yucca and aloe, and it didn't make her less Ukrainian. And I would say more so those non-Ukrainian plants defined her as a person who didn't live in Ukraine despite being Ukrainian. And I think that says a lot. So it makes me ask, you know, why are we Ukrainian if we don't live in Ukraine? And I think the answer is because, you know, we were driven out to far off lands where we're now surrounded by a completely different geography and flora. And we should acknowledge that. And instead of, you know, I don't know, or rather it's okay to acknowledge that. That itself says something about our existence.
Yep. You're waving your hand, Marta.
I was the only one who didn't mention my mama, and in case she watches this, I think it goes without saying, but it should be said too. Hi, Mama. Yeah, I just, you know, also like Mama immigrated as well, had to start life completely, you know, anew in her 30s. And I just remember asking like my mom, you know, like, oh, did you have like a midlife crisis ever? You know, and she's like, no, I had you guys. Like, you know, like it's just, yeah, just this like love, and like also like showing love through action, you know, like I think that like through food and through like caring, I think, you know, that's a lot of what my mama taught me. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for participating in tonight's panel. Your thoughts and observations were very enlightening, and it has been my pleasure to guide our discussions. I look forward to seeing where your art takes you next. Дуже дякую.
And thank you, Roxolana, for keeping us on track. We appreciate collaborating with Kumf on this event. And many thanks to Anna, to Marta, Olenka, and Larisa for so graciously sharing your time and your stories and your perspectives. We learned so much, and we thank you for your bravery and your sharing on this, because we know that it's such a hard time to do that. So we are very grateful that you are continuing to be artists and still continue our culture, because art lives in culture lives in hearts, and you can, as long as our culture lives, as long as you keep on creating, our culture will live. So thank you so much for your work. Remember that this event has been recorded, and so it will be available for ongoing viewing on the SVI YouTube channel. If you know anyone who's missed it and might want to watch it, please share with them. As SVI and its programming wants its programming to be accessible far and wide, and has made events such as this one to reach the public, I would like to gratefully acknowledge the generous support of the Shevchenko Foundation, Community Development Fund, the Seuss Foundation of Canada, the St. Volodymyr Foundation, and the Delta Bingo and Gaming, I guess it would be the fund. Thank you so much. And tonight we have decided to dedicate this event to those who have been affected by the war. And please, if you can, make a donation to help Ukraine right now. And our in-house organization, the Canada-Ukraine Foundation, has partnered with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress in establishing the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal. And donations can be made to many other credible organizations like the Friends of Ukraine Defense Forces Fund, Help Us Help, and the Red Cross Ukraine Humanitarian Crisis Appeal. More information can be found online at helpsaveukraine.com, and each dollar counts. Ukraine does need your support, as we know. Stay connected to us through Facebook, Instagram, and web pages, and participate in our programs virtually. We'll welcome you back to SVI in person for more cultural, artistic, and academic events as soon soon as we can safely do so. But thank you very, very much for joining us this evening. And we would like to also let you know that the Ukrainian Museum of Canada, Ontario branch has just launched the exhibit Legends and Legacies of Borschtub. Please make a point of seeing it. It's quite beautiful. The exhibits are absolutely fantastic, and they are breathtaking. They really are. To see how beautiful our culture is, come and take a look at these sorochki. They are exquisite. On Sunday, March 13th to April 3rd, the Ukrainian Association of Visual Artists of Canada and the Ukrainian Canadian Art Foundation present Artists Stand with Ukraine at the Kumf Gallery, a special exhibit of original artworks donated by Ukrainian Canadian artists, with all proceeds going to help Ukrainian armed forces. On Wednesday, March 23rd, is Design Your Pavuk, which is a straw spider mobile workshop as a part of our Folk Arc series in collaboration with Folk Camp. So that will be also very interesting if you have the time to join that. And on Saturday, April 9th, we have Learn How to Make Pisanki, Ukrainian Easter eggs with natural dyes in collaboration with Folk Camp. And on Sunday, May 15th, Olga Zaitseva-Hertz returns to SVI with Ukrainian folk songs in the Carpathians and on the Canadian prairies. Tomorrow, we also have a fundraiser at the Opera House for many artists. Performing artists are also performing to raise funds for the Ukrainian defense. And if you have a chance to go and see that, that would also be a very interesting event that would support the cause. Thank you again, once again, for your participation. We are so happy that you came, and we hope to see you at one of our events very soon again. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
Slava.